out on the wily, windy moors, we'd roll and fall in green. You had a temper like my jealousy, too hot, too greedy.
I must apologise for that appalling rendition of Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush. Wasn't good, was it? Hey, look, if there's a bandwagon rolling through town, we are more than happy to jump on it here at Pele's Poetry Podcast. And of course, there is a huge bandwagon rolling with Margot Robbie as Cathy and Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff right now. This is the Wuthering Heights edition of Pele's Poetry Podcast. And our contention, Pele, isn't it? That without poetry, Wuthering Heights as a book inspiring all of those versions over the years simply wouldn't exist. Agree? Disagree?
Yeah, I mean, it's completely true. The deeper you dig into the poetic influence of the influence of poetry on Wuthering Heights, the more clear the book becomes in the way you'd want it to be. Obviously, it becomes even more wild and stormy when you read the influence of Shelley and Byron on her imagination, and the confidence they must have given her when she decided she was going to turn from poetry to prose. I think they probably helped her to realize that she hardly had to change a thing. I do have some evidence of that
Okay, well, we're going to come on to that evidence
later.
shortly. But poetry prefigures Wuthering Heights, the book, and then Wuthering Heights, the book, gives rise to all sorts of film versions. As I say, the most recent of which stars the Australian actors Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi as Cathy and Heathcliff. And it'll be interesting to hear whether their Aussie voices can manage to wrap themselves around a Yorkshire accent. Uh,
Are
but
you
also,
going to see it?
do you know what? Just as an aside, I've never really got into Wuthering Heights. I've made a couple of efforts to read it, and I've given up. I don't know whether it's a boy thing, girl thing, where the girls prefer Wuthering Heights to it. I found it all a bit kind of difficult to get into. The plot was just so flipping wild that that I got lost before I'd even got a quarter of the way in. Is that a terrible admission to make?
No, I think that's true for a lot of people, and also men and women. And also, some people, some experts say that it's really badly plotted and that it's only worth reading the first half.
Okay.
Which you should never say, because then that makes people doubt its wholeness, which I never have. I think part of it is a bit like walking around in a fog on a moor. You don't quite know what's going on, and that just helps the language to take the lead for me. So you are in this sort of soup of the wild.
Could we even read it then, rather than reading it as a book with a plot or a lousy plot or a plot that's difficult to follow? Could we read it instead as a piece of poetry, a very long poem, of course, and appreciate it perhaps more at that level than a literary sort of prose level?
Well, I think that's what we're sort of trying to do today, isn't it? We're giving a foothold to Wuthering Heights that's born of its poetic influences, born of Byron and Shelley. They're always good guys to have around when you want to write something epic and radical. And Kate Bush too, she did it too. Let's talk about how she did it, how she reflected it and echoed it.
Okay, so Emily Brontë is cloistered in this parsonage in Haworth in Yorkshire, and she is reading widely. Um, Books, including those by Shelley. So, what were her initial influences, as far as we know?
Well, I would say that Shelley and Byron were massively important at that time. And they were important because this was a time when God was being peeled away, and they'd looked inside the self to find the drama, beyond the church into the fields, and out of England. These guys were the paragons of the paradise of exiles. They didn't even want to be in the country. But Bronte wasn't so lucky, and obviously she was confined to a house because of her gender and her circumstances. And the Romantics opened a door without her having to open the door and walk out and give the Moors an eloquence that is totally fitting to the wild shores of Liecci, where Shelley took his last voyage, and the mountains and canals of Venice that Byron strode around, eventually leading into Greece. So just let me read a little something about how this is specifically forensically attaches itself to Bronte's imagination, or it's one of the things. Shelley wrote about in his Epsischidion, which I've never been able to pronounce, his poem, about the idea of two souls being fundamentally one soul beyond the body. He writes of his beloved as a soul within my soul in the poem. Bronte's Catherine makes exactly the same claim in what's probably the novel's most famous speech. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. There's always this feeling in the Romantics and in Wuthering Heights that it's all so necessary. It's written, it's fated, it's providence that is layering itself on top of these voices. And also the Shelleyan idea that love is not sentiment, but ontology. So it's not a sentimental thing. It's a condition, not a feeling that you choose. It's precisely what Catherine is talking about in this marvelous characterization of a woman setting herself free from her bodice. I mean, if Bronte could have written it, she would have had to take her clothes off and run around the moors naked.
Not to be advised. Not to be advised in the Yorkshire winter weather.
So she doesn't need to take her clothes off. She does it with the rawness in the prose, born of this extraordinary adventurous spirit of Byron and Shelley.
And that verse is so much like the relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine, isn't it? This idea that they are as souls as one rather than two separate
Yes,
souls.
they're like a bird with two wings. The one without the other is just a bird with one wing. It's amazing how she sustains that understanding of this poetic trope of oneness separated. It's just the best description of it ever, and even better than in any poem ever.
So there she is with her sisters at the parsonage in Haworth, reading the Romantics, reading Shelley, your
And
example
writing
there,
poetry.
and writing poetry. The three sisters who were writing under pen names, we should point out. They were the Bell
Oh, I didn't
sisters,
know
weren't they?
that. Oh,
Acton, Currer, and Ellis. Ellis Bell was Emily Brontë, and it was not
wow.
terribly successful, their poetry. They didn't sell very many copies. We've heard that so often before.
Yes, but also, these poems often, as you know, Rich, being a poet or being a journalist and becoming a poet or being a prose writer, a thriller writer, becoming a playwright, these other disciplines are rehearsals for the big one. And it would have given her a lot of practice writing her poetry to write Wuthering Heights. And when I teach poetry, I often explain to people that you don't have to be a poet to learn about poetry. It can help your writing in all these other ways. And she is the pinnacle of that. So one of her most famous poems, which was Emily Dickinson's favorite poem, is No Coward Soul Is Mine. And I just wanted to say very quickly about the syntax in that title is so perfect, and it helps us to understand the syntax in Wuthering Heights. A normal mortal like me might write, my soul is not a coward, or I am not a coward in my soul, but she does it in 5 words, and how she orders those words to set fireworks off out of her window is just, and that's why Dickinson loved her so much. Though earth and man were gone, and suns and universes ceased to be, and thou were left alone, every existence would exist in thee. That's not all of it, but yeah.
Yeah, but you can hear um, Heathcliff and Catherine in those early
About to
lines.
be born, about to
About to
be
be born.
born.
Yeah, yeah. Could you argue then that Wuthering Heights isn't a book with a plot at all, but it's just a very long poem? I mean, might it be better to read it in that way?
I think that's a brilliant idea. Because then you don't you're not looking for the things that you expect in a conventional plotted novel. Here you have as if you're walking, it's almost like AI or what's that thing that you put a mask on your eyes and you walk out another reality.
Virtual
Um,
reality.
Virtual reality. You know, the language is, it's like a landscape that's been unexplored that you have to explore yourself alone. And poetry is the best thing for understanding how to tackle it to me, because poetry is the great non-linear form. It's upside down and inside out, and it helps her to explore what she doesn't even quite know herself and what the characters are howling to the wind.
Certainly, critics. I'm laughing because critics used almost those exact words when describing both shortly after publication and subsequently Wuthering Heights. Let me just read from my notebook because I was scribbling these words down as you were speaking. Nonlinear, upside down, and inside out. I mean, the plot is challenging, isn't it? It jumps through time and space and place so much that it can do your head in.
Yeah, I mean, like this, I wish I were a girl again, half savage and hardy and free and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. I'm sure I should be myself where I once among the heather on those hills. And it's a kind of magic that she manages to create. She makes Heathcliff into those hills, into that wild, almost self-harming, ecstatic magic. Back to Sylvia Plath.
Well, yes, so many parallels, and you find these when you delve a little deeper, and they can only really be coincidences, but amazing coincidences nonetheless. Emily Brontë died age 30. We think of tuberculosis. Her brother Bramwell died a few months or weeks before her of tuberculosis, so that's quite likely. Sylvia Plath died age 30. Um, they both tramped around the Yorkshire moors, Heptonstall, Plath,
Mm.
and Ted Hughes'
Where
home
she's buried.
was just 10 miles away from Haworth Parsonage, and you
Wow.
know the poetic crossover between them is extraordinary. I read both Sylvia Plath's Wuthering Heights, which is dark and wily and windy,
Dark
like
and stormy like the cocktail.
exactly, and Ted Hughes, which is much lighter by comparison. And it's fascinating to compare the two, knowing as we do their characters as well.
And their tragedy and their destiny and it's a kind of modern destiny compared to Bronte's, isn't it? That Plath ended her life is something like taking your destiny into your own hands, is something that Bronte was alluding to, but would never have considered. So it's as if they're holding hands across time, Bronte and Plath, the one instructing the other in some crazy, dark, magical way.
Yeah. Second verse of Wuthering Heights by Sylvia Plath is particularly dark. There is no life higher than the grass tops or the heart of sheep, and the wind pours by like destiny, bending everything in one direction. I can feel it trying to funnel my heat away. If I pay the roots of the heather too close attention, they will invite me to whiten my bones among them.
Absolutely magnificent.
You know, she wanted to lay down and die then, you could argue, with that
Yeah.
last line of verse two of Wuthering Heights.
Poetry does bring comfort. The thing that I found when I started to write a very depressed young woman was that this wild, dark articulation using words was a way to feel alive, not deadened by it, but made live by it. And you get close up to these ley lines of other writers, like Plath did with Bronte in that moment, and you feel this communion that is life-saving.
So there's an inner landscape, the door of which has been opened by Shelley, by Byron, but there's that literal door of the parsonage in Haworth where you open the door.
Mm,
You can
yeah.
imagine the wild wind roaring around the gable ends
Yeah.
and providing that outward inspiration. So there's something about place, external and internal.
And what about Kate Bush? How does she fit into all this, do you think?
Well, I printed off the lyrics of the song that I completely crucified at the start of this episode, but it is indeed poetic as well. And I think it's easy to kind of knock a pop version of Wuthering Heights, but no, don't knock it at all. It was the way that many people, myself included, were able to access Wuthering Heights, the book,
Yes.
and to learn more about Emily Brontë. Out on the wily, windy moors, we'd roll and fall in green. You had a temper like my jealousy, too hot, too greedy. I mean, it sounds a little cliched because, hey, it's been played endlessly since it was first released in 1978. But how could you leave me when I needed to possess you? I hated you. I loved you too. It's a one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10 or 15 verse version of a book that's too long for most people to persevere with, but the song lasts just long enough to kind of get the hang of it.
Yeah, I mean, Bronte helps through Heathcliff, helps Kate Bush to fall in love and find the words for love and find the words for her own voice and her own music. I mean, it's an extraordinary globe, cosmology that's going on there between all of those people. It makes a voice, talking of a poetic voice, it makes a voice that nobody's ever heard before. I mean, she's a genius. She's up there. She's equal to Bronte and Plath, absolutely. Just because she sounds contemporary, it doesn't diminish the power and greatness of it.
Windows figure in Wuthering Heights as a kind of portal to another place, not just from the inside to the outside and vice versa. So we've got in Kate Bush's version, Heathcliff, it's me, I'm Cathy, I've come home, I'm so cold, let me in your window. And then we look across to Wuthering Heights by Sylvia Plath, and we've got, where are we? Lintel and sill have unhinged themselves of people, and the air only remembers a few odd syllables. It rehearses them moaningly. Black stone, black stone.
Beautiful. And and the windows when you read you mentioned how Wuthering Heights is difficult to crack. We all have the windows that we look from as we read that great work, and it is like a difficult window you can't quite open, when you're in an old house and it's a bit stuck and jammed, and then the window flies open and there's the world. It's worth the effort. And I really feel like we must have Heathcliff's voice. He is an extraordinary description of the male psyche. And some say that Milton's Paradise Lost, that he's actually the devil in Paradise Lost, that he's a reflection, which Bronte would have read Paradise Lost by Milton as much as she would have read the Romantic poets. But this last poem by Shelley, I just want to read a tiny bit of it because it's lines written in the Bay of Leachi, which he wrote for another woman just before he set off on his voyage, which would be his last, and drowned him. And the melancholy and the longing, but the fire in the longing and the sadness. Only Shelley and Byron can do this. And this is what she's taken from to find her Heathcliff. She left me at the silent time when the moon had ceased to climb the azure path of heaven's steep, and like an albatross asleep, balanced on her wings of light, hovered in the purple night ere she sought her ocean nest in the chambers of the west. She left me, and I stayed alone, thinking over every tone, which through the silent to the ear, the enchanted heart could hear like notes which die when born.
Wow. Again, prefiguring Wuthering Heights, you can hear Cathy and Heathcliff in there, Heathcliff's voice in particular.
you know, it's almost like a cellist. You know, she's heard this great concerto by Shelley and Byron, and she is playing the cello of her own feeling about this language, you know. She makes her own music like Kate Bush does. And these heavyweights, I'm not saying she's not a heavyweight, but these masculine tones are material for her.
Is there a boy-girl thing going on here? I would reckon that Emily Brontë, her two sisters, would be way more popular amongst women readers than male readers, men
I mean,
readers.
how do you feel about Heathcliff as a character, Rich? I mean, it's the question one always wants to ask a man.
Well, yeah,
Do
he
you
was
relate to him? Is he
well.
like you deep down? I mean, are
Well,
you like him deep down?
well, you'd have to take the Fifth Amendment on that one, wouldn't you? Um, well, he was a bit of a bastard, wasn't he? So I'm not going to say yes. Of course, I'm not. But I'd quite like to look like some of the interpretations of Heathcliff that Hollywood and others have come up with. That's for sure. He was a bit of a swashbuckler, wasn't he? So at one level, yes, but at others, definitely not. But my question stands:
Yeah.
do you think there are some poets and some writers more generally have a greater appeal? Again, if we're looking for echoes between Bronte and Plath, you know, I would argue that Plath and Bronte are revered. I think that's the right word among a very, very vocal and loyal female audience, appreciated, of course, by men as well, but in fewer numbers.
He's a bloke, right? We're in love with him when we read, or most of us. She gave us that man to love. And I think it's the same with women poets. You know, men fall in love with these female poets, or hopefully they do. Or the voices, you know, created by men and women who are the great females in literature, who we helps us to understand. It's like looking through a keyhole into a gender or a sexuality or a potential love, isn't it? The novel or the poem helps you to see something in great detail that explains the unknowable.
The reason I ask is because the Ted Hughes version of Wuthering Heights is starkly different to the Sylvia Plath version, as one might expect. It was written sometime later in uh, the birthday letters.
Which is
And
his great work to great elegy to her, isn't it? To,
exactly. So if you want to listen to the whole poem, Wuthering Heights by Ted Hughes, visit pelecox.com, where we'll put a recording of the whole poem. But for the podcast, Wuthering Heights starts with a description of very matter of fact, Ted Hughesian description of he and Sylvia visiting the parsonage at Haworth, and it
do you know the date?
starts indoors. Well, it's going to have to be in the late 1950s or very early 60s, isn't it? Because she
Yeah.
died in, what was it, 61.
Hmm.
And then it goes outdoors through a door, through a portal, if you like. It
Gosh.
was the track. It was the track from Stanbury, that climb, a mile beyond expectation, into Emily's private Eden. The moor lifted and opened its dark flower for you too. That was satisfactory, wilder maybe than ever. Emily knew it, with wet feet and nothing on her head. She trudged that climbing side towards friends, probably. Dark redoubt on the skyline above. It was all novel and exhilarating to you, the book becoming a map, Wuthering Heights withering into perspective. We got there, and it was all gaze. The open moor, gamma rays, and decomposing starlight had repossessed it with a kind of blackening smoulder.
Gosh, that's amazing. He's brilliant. He picks up the threads from the floor and he holds them up to you. Oh my goodness, I've got shivers. They're multiplying.
There's another song.
Can I please just before we conclude, although it's lovely to think of ending on that, could I please, because Byron, you know, you cannot talk about Heathcliff without talking about Byron. And, you know, she would have been in love with Byron from afar. You know, Byron mania was what happened when he died. I think it was about 10 years before she wrote Wuthering Heights. I'm probably wrong about that, but something like that. And, you know, she would have wanted to find maybe his voice in her voice. And this may have been one of the paint colors she used. It's from Manfred, his great poem, Act Two, The Summoning of Astarte. Here is Heathcliff. Hear me, Astarte, my beloved, speak to me. I have so much endured, so much endure. Look on me. The grave hath not changed thee more than I am changed for thee. Thou lovest me too much as I loved thee. We were not made to torture thus each other, though it were the deadliest sin to love as we have loved.
So Heathcliff's voice is so loud and clear in the lines you've just read, Pele, that it's almost impossible to conceive of Emily Brontë not reading those lines before she composed her character, her male lead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of discussion, isn't there? Who read what and what did they know before they wrote something, and not was it lifted, but was it sort of appropriated? But to me, you know, those things don't matter. Maybe she did read that passage, or maybe she didn't. I think it's about connection on a deeper level, that you're absorbing a voice, a poet's voice, and it's ruminating in your dreams when you sleep, when you're walking on the moors. You know, you are building a very profound connection to that voice. It's not linear. It's not something you look on the page at and then take and put in something on your page. It's much more interesting, profound than that. We need to, if you want to find your voice, find the writers you love, and they will conduct your voice, like the orchestra of your voice, into a shape.
Lovely way of putting it. So, at a deeper or potentially at a shallower level, will you be connecting with Cathy and Heathcliff as portrayed by Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi?
Well, I think, you know, it's funny, isn't it? You know, one makes one claim, and then the ground is, you pull the ground from under your own feet. I mean, I don't like to watch biopics because I have my own picture, my own film going on inside myself. When I read Wuthering Heights, I've already seen it, and it's mine. You know, it's between me and Bronte and Heathcliff and Cathy. But you know, um, the visual, the image of our time. You know, what we see is it's too much sometimes. The imagination has to compete with it, I think. I think sometimes we can, you know, just go for the book instead and trust our own Netflix, our own internal Netflix.
Lovely way of putting it. Our own internal Netflix. Hey, look, I would go on this basis if I could go and watch a matinee performance of Wuthering Heights with Emily Brontë to my left, um, Kate Bush to my right, and just in front of me, Margot Robbie. There we are.
Yeah.
Just the four of us.
No, Oh, you're Heathcliff. Yes, of course.
And
Sorry,
what can we
silly
look
me.
forward to? All joking aside, what can we look forward to in a future episode?
Well, next we're doing Forbidden Love Part Two. We hope this Wuthering Heights episode has set the bar for diving into the next waters of the forbidden. And it's funny, I'm talking about diving. See, there's my subconscious. We're going to talk about how David Hockney pulled a poet from obscurity, a poet who wrote in secret about his sexuality, and writ him large in some of his own work to help make sure that we're still speaking his name today. So we'll tell you what his name is next time and read some of his poems, which are profound and beautiful and worthy of a Hockney etching.